Hello, and welcome back to We're Not So Different, a podcast about how we've always been idiots. My name is Luke Waters, and I have a head cold. And as always, I'm joined by Dr. Eleanor Yaniga, who, as far as I know, does not have a head cold this very moment.
No, currently.
Today, we have an interview, so we don't have a question. But you should subscribe to our Patreon anyway, because it's fun and it's nice and it makes us feel good. Patreon.com/WNSDpod. Yeah, and you can vote for the next book we're going to do, whether it is the Decameron or The Name of the Rose. And yeah, you can vote for which one of those we'll start after we finish up the series on Andor. But anyway, yeah, let's get on to the show. So a long time ago, long before Germany was even became a formal state, the German peoples used to occasionally try and do good stuff in addition to all the untold misery they manifest into the world. Though you would note from the past 120 years or so, Germans have produced some pretty cool shit. The list includes hot dogs, possibly hamburgers, depending on who you ask, our very good friends Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, some of the funnier aspects of the Holy Roman Empire, and the German Peasants War. Well, that's pretty much the whole list. In fact, the last of these examples, the German Peasants War, will celebrate its 500th anniversary in 2024, and it is our topic for today. You'll no doubt recall that the Peasants' War was from our series on heresies in the Reformation, as it was the first major engagement following the start of the Reformation. It was the massive revolt in 1524 and 1525 that featured some 300,000 untrained peasants who were emboldened by the revolutionary ideals of the radical Reformation. And they thought, if the Bible says God created all people, then shouldn't all people who were created be equal regardless of the happenstance of their birth? No need for serfdom or class divisions or any of that silliness, right? Well, you'd think so, but the magisterial Reformation folks, like Martin Luther, were very awful to our poor peasants, and they were slaughtered in their tens of thousands. But now you're no doubt thinking, well, of course I remember all of that, Luke, and I obviously agree that Germany has only created like 6 good things in history. But what does the German Peasants' War have to do with medieval history or the series on proto-nationalism? And you're right to think that because
Shut up.
It does happen in the early modern period, and it isn't really part of the proto-nationalism series. But November asked if she could come on and talk about the German Peasants' War, and we enthusiastically agreed. As you likely know, November is the co-host of various podcasts, including Trashfuture, Kill James Bond, and Well, There's Your Problem. And she's here to celebrate 500 years of the German Peasants' War with us. In November, how the hell are you?
I'm so well. Thank you for having me on. It's an absolute delight to be able to talk about some filthy lads ruining it for everyone and upsetting this sort of nice, orderly, early modern Germany. Yeah. I assume. I haven't checked.
Yeah, it says here everything was fine up until this point.
Yeah, until these go, but for these meddling peasants, you know,
and their little dog too. Yeah. So yeah. Before we really get into it, why'd you want to talk about the German Peasants' War? What's the interest?
Two reasons. Firstly, I'm never not going to support anyone who has a rainbow flag and whose ideology is kill the rich. But secondly, I think it has something to tell us about specifically war crimes and war crimes by people who are not allowed to do them. People for whom it is not their prerogative, which may have some modern parallels. Don't know.
I don't think so. I think that's, no. Sorry, Alice. Turns out this piece of history is completely irrelevant. Yeah.
No, it's a waste of time, really.
That's the show.
Sorry we found out this way.
Thanks, everyone, for coming. No. Turns out no.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for, for listening to this extremely long podcast that we've done. Yeah, we'll see you next time. No, I'm just kidding. So yeah, I guess the German Peasants' War is really like the story of the peasants trying to be like, hey, what if we didn't do this? What if we weren't insane?
Yeah,
about this?
It's like the story of how you kind of co-opt and turn and neutralize and like a new sort of like uncontrolled variable. Like and I mean, like peasant revolts, lots of them in history, but like it's somehow always unexpected as a function of like ideology, I guess. It just never seems to, even though it happened to like your father and your grandfather and his grandfather, if you were a sort of like German aristocrat of the period, it's as completely unexpected to you that like all of the guys who do all of the field work are like, you know, marching on you with pitchforks and torches as if like my washing machine were to bite me, right? Like it doesn't, it's sort of like it's outside my ability to really think of this as a thing. It's not supposed to do that.
Yeah, I think that it is a really interesting one because I think, you know, when you're talking about people in the past, there are some things that you just kind of have to get on board with, right? So especially within this, right, we've got to accept that everybody is a Christian and that they do genuinely believe these things, and like, okay, sounds weird, but all right, you know, like there's this genuine emotional way of relating very specifically to all these things. But part of it is also the fact that rich guys just cannot get it around their head that like peasants are people. They're like, no, this is my toaster. And why is it mad? Like right now, and all I did was ask it to go get some snail shells. I mean, that's probably an apocryphal story, but do you guys know the snail shell story? Okay, all right.
No.
So there's this apocryphal story. It's like very let them eat cake, right? But the story goes that in 1524, over in like the Black Forest, the Countess of Lupfen was trying to make some jam. And she was also trying to get some sewing done, as a bitch does, right? Now, she, however, didn't have like the correct form of berries to make the jam, and she had run out of snail shells. And snail shells were used as thread spools. Like, you know, because you could just kind of like take the thread through it, and you know, because you could just punch a hole in the end and then run things through it. So the story goes that she's like, all right, guys, I know that you are in the middle of the harvest right now, and but I need you to stop everything and go get me some snail shells and also these berries that I want. Yeah.
Fetch quests.
Exactly.
Everyone loves them.
And basically the peasants were like, absolutely get fucked and like basically rise up. Now, there are some contributing factors as well. Part of this had been that like earlier, her husband had been like, hey guys, I need you to go over there and fetch me a bunch of wine. Like, I don't know, he wanted like wine moved from one castle to another or something. And like, and again, during the harvest. So, but everyone likes to focus on it being like the countess's fault. So this is probably not, I mean, like this might have been an inciting incident, but it isn't like the thing. But if people want a kind of like storybook idea of what kicked it all off, it's this story about snail shells, and I think that it's kind of fun because mostly I just like snails. Yeah,
snails are great. Also, I remembered a third reason why I wanted to talk about this, which is I get to talk about Gertz von Berlichingen. One of the weirdest dudes to ever do it, sort of peak Swabian. The man with the iron prosthetic hand and arm, most famous for like coining the phrase "Leck mich im Arsch," like "lick me in the ass" in German.
So German.
And who ended up on the peasant side of a peasant revolt, more or less by accident.
You know what? Signs and fucking wonders, I have to say. Like, if you can get a weird German guy on your side and he's got a metal arm, no wonder they thought that they had the juice, right? They're like,
yeah, we've got to go with an iron arm. I mean,
let's fucking go.
There's not a lot of those kicking around in the, you know, in the early modern period. And yeah, I mean, the thing about Gertz is that he kind of, when the revolt breaks out, it's difficult to say because most of what we know about this is from essentially his like police interrogation after the fact, where they sort of, they bring him to a diet and they're like, why did you lead a peasant revolt? And he's like, because it was there, and because like I wanted to, no one else was doing it, and most importantly, to push the peasant revolt to the right.
Oh God. Ugh.
Yeah, he genuinely like joined the peasant revolt to like change it from the inside,
Wow.
which is so funny to me. But I mean, that we don't know whether that's like a sort of something he actually believed, whether it was like a gambit, but it did work for him. He only got like internally exiled over this, which is not bad compared to what happened to your actual peasants.
Yeah. Goes less well for them. Like, spoiler alert, everyone, they didn't manage to win and start a peasant-built utopia. Don't know if you heard that.
Yeah, this is true of like all the peasant revolts, apart from like later stuff like the Haitian Revolution. But like, I think a lot about the Bundschuh movement, which like preceded this, and specifically the Upper Austrian Peasants' War, which is like 100 years after this, in like 1620 something. Mostly because they share a vibe, right? And I think a lot about. I mentioned the rainbow flag that these guys had, which they actually did. It had a white banner with a rainbow on it. It was vibes. But Stefan Fadinger, the leader of this Austrian peasant revolt, 100 years later, his banners said, albeit in a horrible Austrian dialect, "Es muss sein," it must be, right? So, like, I think that cuts to the heart of why peasant revolts is all of these people know perfectly well that they're gonna, like, get crushed and get, like, horribly tortured and executed on the way there. But, like, you have no other option. It's in some of the stuff that, Enlightenment revolutionaries use is very much trying to grapple with the same thing. It's an appeal to heaven, right? And I think particularly with the German Peasants' War, you can locate that in the context of the Reformation and be like, okay, well, it doesn't necessarily matter if you win temporarily because you are going to win spiritually,
Yeah, I find that a really interesting aspect because there's like a lot of the propaganda against it, which is, what we have most of, right? Because they got rid of all the good shit after they crushed them. They'll be like, oh, yeah, Thomas Müntzer promised everybody, Thomas Müntzer being like kind of the most prominent preacher who was like for the Peasant Wars. They'd be like, oh, yeah, he promised everybody that, they couldn't be hurt because they had God on their side, and see, they all got slaughtered like dogs. So, where's your God now, Thomas Müntzer? And it's like, whoa, okay, like calm down, Martin Luther, right? Like probably he did not say that. But, he probably did say something like, even if you die, like God loves this shit, actually, which makes some sense. But yeah, it's a really interesting one because I really dig the radical reformers like surprise. Right, because in the first place, homeboys are like holding it down for Czech things. So like, there's really kind of porous border going on in between, the kind of Prussian lands and Bohemia at the time. So you got homies going back and forth, and indeed, like Thomas Müntzer, one of his big things that we have is these articles that he wrote down while he was in Prague, because he like kind of tries to go over, and the Czechs are kind of like amused. Because Czechs are kind of like constantly trying to get Germans to come over to their side, but they don't really feel like they need any German leaders either. So Müntzer is this kind of like it's cute how he does that. But anyway, he like goes back and he's like, "That's it. God told me." In the first place, God told me that all you hoes in the universities are a bunch of little bitches. And like he specifically has this thing where he hates academics, and I'm like, oh, I love him because he's like.
Yeah, if you were going to be a radical preacher in Germany at this point, you had to pick somebody to have a really obsessive hatred for. And Luther chose poorly. This guy chose pretty well.
And he was like, I fucking says here, Martin Luther's a little bitch. And all he wants to do is like hang out in the university and talk about how fancy he is. Come out here and say it. And Luther is like, I will not go out there and say it. Like, it's just, that is not going to happen the whole time. So.
Yeah, Luther sort of occupies like a Dr. Frankenstein role here, in that like having started the Reformation, he is now watching it like tumble out of control. And now peasants are saying things like, well, wait a second. If I can, as we alluded to at the beginning, if I can read this Bible in German and what it says is, or have it read to me, I guess, and what it says is, the first shall be last, the last shall be first. Why not now? Why does this guy get to push me around? Why am I gathering these snail shells? What if we just stab Caesar?
And then, meanwhile, you've got Luther being like, I was actually hanging out with the rich guys. It's like the only reason his ass is not dead is because he lives in a castle right now. Because, Frederick the Wise is, air quotes, kidnapped him, right? So he's like, I think the princes are really good, actually. And it's so, it's like incredible bootlicking where, and of course he, writes that on against the murderous, thieving hordes of peasants afterward. And it's just like, he spends all this time just sucking ass, right? Just being like, princes, it's okay. Actually, Protestantism is for you. It's not for them. You could actually keep more money. And I promise you, I don't think that peasants are people. And it's just the worst shit. The worst possible thing that you could actually do. Because at least, when the lords are oppressing people, they're honest with it. They're like, well, just don't want to work. Yeah,
What am I going to go and get the snails? No. Obviously not.
But Martin Luther is like, oh, God hierarchy. I don't know where I'm going with this. It's just it's so it's such a poor thought exercise. Is the thing
because it's pure cynicism, right? Because it's like having sort of kicked off this theological fissure. What you're left with is either taking the kind of Münzer or Savonarola role of okay, well, this is genuinely going to be a threat to somebody. Or you can convince all of the little sort of princelings around you. This is a sort of suitable competing denomination that you can still do all of the same shit. It's like your energy supplier sending you a letter that's you can switch to us. It's going to be easy. It's going to be, if anything, it's going to be cheaper.
Yeah, I mean, 100. It's a good way to sell it, right? And this is, I try not to go too far with that because obviously there are deeply held religious beliefs in all of this, but I think that you also can't downplay and there was money in it for the princes and things like that.
Money and for Luther not getting your throat cut. I think that's the not getting burned at the stake.
He's bitch made. Sorry, I'm it's got to be Hus every time because Jan Hus is not only did I set it, I want you to burn me at the stake. Martin Luther's help, oh it's something good happened. Oh no, save me, princess. It's just man, how the tyranny of Germanic culture is such that this man has somehow been elevated over Jan Hus, and I will not let it lie. If you're gonna do it, be absolutely fucking wild with it. Go get burnt at the stake. If people were oh, I just love Thomas Müntzer or whatever, I'd be okay, word, that's cool. I think it's cooler if you're just bonkers with it, frankly. Yeah.
I think one thing that's interesting is how the revolutionary strain of Christianity tries to peek out from these movements, and it happened with the Hussites, with the Taborites, who wanted to go much farther than the Utrechists did, and it also had that same kind of potential back before it was adopted wholesale by the Roman Empire, back before the 300s. But you see this, and every time these people try to come out and they try to do it, and they're look, this is the revolutionary spirit of Christianity. You will be freed from your bonds. You will no longer be a slave or whatever. And then they just they pop out and get their throats cut every time. The Taborites are left to burn. The peasants are fucking slaughtered beyond measure. And the Anabaptists are going to try it again, in Munster. And that's it's not going to go well. And I mean, since then, I don't you don't really see much of that, of the like revolutionary spirit of Christianity anymore in that aspect anyway.
I think it's sort of quite geographically segregated. It's 100%. You can find this in like liberation theology in South America, right? Of like, guys getting thrown out of helicopters for this stuff. Like, same in Brazil as well. Like, there's a lot of this stuff, but again, it's kind of like, you can have this kind of like temporal loss and get martyred, and God loves this. Actually, God is a huge fan of this, and you get to die proving a very important point, and it's sort of like the theology being articulated here in the German Peasants' War is, I think, not that developed just because it doesn't have the chance to be. It's like one guy going to Prague and being like, and doing a post, a really good post, to be fair, where he sort of like anticipates a bunch of Enlightenment values of like human rights and like equality and stuff. It's like, hey, we should do all of this, and then it kind of all goes wrong.
I mean, they're also up against, like, in terms of like the liberatory aspects of the radical Reformation, right? You basically got Munzer, whose stuff survives to us, and even then, it's bonkers that it did at all, because the number of presses that were basically shut down. They were like, "You're not printing Munzer, are they?" Like, no. And so, but he's this really obsessive letter writer, and he's like constantly writing to Martin Luther, being like, "Hey, fuck you."
Posts, you have to do posts, you have to be a crank on the internet because it makes this kind of thing
it's like,
possible.
That's how we know about all this, is just like flame war shit, where he's like, like, say it to my face, you're a little bitch. Oh, are you still hiding in that castle? Me and all my homies are peasants. Me and all my homies are about to start a revolution. What are you gonna do? You're not gonna do shit. And it's like, it's amazing. It's actually amazing. And like, also fucking filthy. He's always like, I would shit on your face. Like,
again, Germans, particularly Swabians, because a lot of this happened in Swabia, and as I mentioned with Goetz, they're kind of very, very scatologically minded people.
Like, university is toilet, Martin Luther is dog people, Swabian is first use fork, etc. Like, that's what's going down.
Yeah. And so I have a lot more time for that kind of style of abuse than I do for the kind that Luther traffics in, where he just, like, you can tell he's getting madder and madder as he's writing it, because he starts including more synonyms. You can tell when he does this, because he's like, we shouldn't just, like, kill the peasants, we should kill, slay, slaughter the peasants. And I'm like, okay, you pick one.
It's like, it's not
dude.
making it better. It isn't.
No, edit. You needed an editor,
Ugh, it's just like, Martin Luther just sucks, and I just feel like you have to know that he sucks. Like, when you look at his response to like the peasants, right? So let's talk about the 12 articles, which, again, an excellent fucking post. So don't worry, guys. I looked them all up for you. So the first is that every town and village shall be entitled to elect and dismiss its preacher if he misbehaves. The preacher shall preach the gospel simply, straight, and clear, without any human additions, for it is written that we can only attain God through the true faith. So that's cool. Background to this, obviously, is that a lot of people's priests sucked. Sometimes you're
corrupt priest, you're immoral priest.
Your priest who's running the brothel, your priest who doesn't speak your language, or like your dialect. Like, these are common guys. These are like guys that are normal. And also, it's interesting that they're like, he's like, just say the gospel, don't do a sermon, which is interesting because actually sermons whip, and I'm going to disagree with them on that. But I suppose if all you were getting was the sermon in your own language, you might want the Bible as well. So you see where they're coming from, right? And also, and they're like, well, we want to appoint our own preachers because we want like the Thomas Munzer guys. We don't want Martin Luther guys. And you're like, I mean, relatable. Yeah.
Yeah, the whole point of getting rid of the Catholic Church in the first
like,
place.
Why can't we have the guy that we want, right? And then the second one is that the preachers should be paid from the great tithe, and that any surplus should be used to help the village poor and pay the war tax. And the small tithe should be abolished. So the great tithe is like the one that you're supposed to do every year. And the small tithe is basically like, hey guys, I think you should also give me more money. Exactly.
Tip,
it's the tip for your Lord. And so they're like, you shouldn't have to pay the small tithe because it was invented by humans. I'm like, guys, God did not invent the regular tithe, but okay. So like basically the preacher should, you know, if we're picking them locally, we'll pay them. We're not saying that we won't, but like we're not paying the church or whatever, right?
Yeah, and again, it's striking that like this incredibly frightening radical movement that's going to lead to a bunch of people getting burned at the stake, their second demand is moderate tax reform.
Which is just like beyond the fucking pale. Like, I mean, if these bitches had monocles, they would be popping. You know, like it's like they absolutely cannot stand like tax reform, which is cute because you think it's German, but it's not. You know, how about that?
And it's kind of still like this, you know, fewer flensings, but
okay. The third one is that until now, it's the practice that we have been treated like serfs, which is deplorable, since Christ redeemed all of us with his precious blood, both the shepherd and the nobleman, with no exceptions. Accordingly, we hereby declare that we are free and want to remain free. Okay, now you've done it. Like the Duke of Swabia has had a heart attack. Right.
Yeah. You're cooking. You've claimed that your life has like equal value, and admittedly, you've done it in a kind of like now strange, but to us, based on how fucking serious and intense it is, Christian martyrology thing. Of okay, you used to be able to like kick us around, but Christ died for all of us. Yeah. Therefore, you can't.
I love
do
it.
That
They're
to
like,
us
before
anymore.
Christ came. By the way, serfdom was totally chill. Like, I want to make that. I mean. Fair play. We were kind of dirt people then, but you know, Jesus sorted it out for us, so it's pretty all right. It's pretty all right. And like this is like Martin Luther hates this shit. It's
like ew, gross. You know?
Okay, so the fourth is it is unbrotherly and not in accordance with the word of God that the poor man is not entitled to hunt game or fowl or fish, since when God our Lord created man, he gave him power over all beasts, the birds in the air and the fish in the water. Fucking cook. Yeah.
Literally. Like, go hunt a deer.
It's so fucked up that they weren't allowed to just catch food, and they're like, no, because that's my special emotional support deer. That
I need this forest as my safe space.
I don't know. Everywhere I go, people are always like, hey, you're a murderous bitch. I'm starving. You took all my money. No, I won't get you snail shells. And I really have to go into the forest and just unwind about it.
Thinking about how many nobles got like assassinated or were attempted to be assassinated like while hunting, I'm like, it's not really a safe space.
Still.
But
he died doing what he loved, just murdering animals for sport. And like maybe eating them. I don't know. Okay, so the fifth one then is the nobles have taken sole possession of the forest. When the poor man needs something, he must buy it for twice its price. Consequently, all the forests that were not bought, meaning former community forests, which many rulers simply appropriated, shall be returned to the village so that anybody can satisfy his needs, therefore, for timber and firewood. This is real shit.
Yeah, and it's curious too, because it's not even like it's specifically unenclose. Like go back to the commons, which is something that I think is generally thought of as being a much later phenomenon. Specifically being like, no, you have enclosed this natural resource that used to be a commons. You have to make it be a commons again.
And like this was a real big problem. So it's a big thing that also contributed to the Hussite Revolution, is specifically access to firewood. And this trouble of how people were having a difficult time accessing it, and nobles were basically just gouging, where they'd be like, no, poor people have to pay twice as much for firewood, which is like how you heat your fucking house. And it's like, but I used to cops this for you. And it's like, well, now you cops it for me and I'm charging you for it. Which is like, it's fucked up, man. Like, it's incredibly fucked up, the enclosure thing. So yeah, it does show you how materially it was a process. You know, we do tend to kind of think of it as something that happens right around the time of industrialization, but it was a creeping thing, right? So you know, again, just cooking, just fucking cooking here, right? The sixth is that excessive and compulsory labor demanded of us, which grows from day to day, it should be reduced to the amount that our parents used to perform according to God's word. So this is fucking hilarious, right? Because this is so moderate.
Yeah, it's conservative even. Like, we just want you to go back to turn it back a generation.
Yeah. I'm not even saying I won't do the fucking work.
Yeah.
I'll get the snails. I just don't want to get as many
just
snails.
Not during harvest time, right? You should have thought about this before. It's so little to ask, and they're so mad about it. It's I fucking hate nobility. I mean, what can you even fucking say, right? And also, I just want to point out that it is a well-established fact by this point in time that a lot of people see the labor charges, like the corvée, the robot, wherever you want to call it, they do see it as immoral. Like, this is a big thing that my boy Milic is always going on about in the 14th century. So you've got centuries worth of people going it's kind of fucked up that you make poor people work for you for free. So this isn't new. Everybody knows this is something that's in the water, right? Okay, so the seventh is the nobility shall not force us to perform more compulsory labor than was agreed upon, right? Which, again, they're like,
you just have to keep your promises.
Basic
How hard is
contract
that?
law,
It's
right?
Yeah.
I mean, and so this is basically again with the snail shells,
Well, again, this is why you have a banner with a rainbow on it, right? It's like if you do not keep your contracts, your promises with us, then God is going to do it, and you're not going to like it.
Exactly. So it's again, if your Germans want to pretend they're bureaucratic, then how come everyone was so mad about this, right? I'm just saying. So, okay, the eighth is that many fields cannot produce enough to pay the rent demanded from them. Honest men shall inspect these lands and set a fair amount of rent for them, so that farmers need not work for free, because each day's work deserves its pay. So it's
incredible.
Yeah, fuck landlords. Yeah.
Fuck landlords. Fuck the early modern equivalent of property developers. Specifically, you can't do the thing that Donald Trump or any property developer is still doing of artificially inflating the value of your investments, right? You can't say that this this wheat field produces gold and then tax me or make me pay rent on that amount.
It's this is the equivalent of saying, I just think that a room where the microwave is over the bed in Dalston shouldn't cost £12,000 a month. I'm just saying that, right?
Yeah.
And they were so right for it. They were so right.
And of course, these days, if you say that, you will also be burned at the stake. So.
That's true. I believe that's in the Labour manifesto. They're putting that in. So, yeah.
Yeah. The estate agents are forming a league. They've got some lands next.
That's my fucking neighborhood. Jesus Christ. I just see them down there. They're the only people who wear suits, and they're. Yeah, I can see two of them out my window right now. Anyway,
this sort of handshake thing between Landsnecht and estate agents, very distinctive mode of dress, very predatory ethics.
It's very shiny. They're very shiny. Okay, so the ninth is new laws are constantly being made to impose new fines. Punishments are not being meted out depending on the offense, but instead in an arbitrary fashion. In our opinion, we should be judged in accordance with the old written law, according to the case's merits, instead of on a whim.
It's just, it's really striking how many of these things are against sort of obvious short cons by aristocracy who have clearly just thought of the idea of why don't we just start fining them for stuff?
This is such a big deal too in terms of legal matters in sort of both the medieval and the early modern period. There's this thing that people will always say, which is customary law, which is bro, that's just how it's always been done. So even if it isn't written down, if people can attest that this is how it's always been done, that's usually kind of good enough legal proof. And these guys are going one further, where they're saying, I'm not even just saying this is how it's always been done, but also you fucking wrote it down. So, again, basic contract law. It's absolutely, it's so depressing. Anyway. Okay, the 10th is that many nobles have appropriated meadows and fields belonging to the towns. We want them returned to all of us in common. So bring back the common. Yes. Like, I mean, where am I?
Merits 2 points. One for forests.
Yeah, homie, I'm trying to graze over here. Right?
Yeah.
The 11th is the Toadfall, which is basically like, death tax. Shall be abolished altogether, and never again shall widows and orphans be shamefully robbed, contrary to God and honor.
Moderate tax reform again.
Now, having said that, I'm kind of against this just because of what Tories are doing with it now, but there's like the death tax, and I'm like, shut the fuck up. I don't care about how, what's going on in your townhouse in Chelsea, actually. But when it comes to peasants, I'm with them. So, yeah, circumstantial. We'll say that, I think. And then the 12th is, it is our decision and final opinion that if one or more of the articles listed herein contradicts God's work, we shall rescind them if it is explained to us on the basis of what is written. If any articles were already granted to us and it emerges afterwards that they were unjust, then they shall be null and void. Likewise, all of this is subject to the condition that if additional articles are found here written that are against God and a grievance by some other person. So, also, yeah,
debate
we reserve the right to, we will debate this. And also, if you can prove that, if you can change our mind, fair enough, which is, again, so incredibly reasonable.
You're doing the Stephen Crowder thing of you're setting out a stall in front of the monastery that's you shouldn't have all of that shit in there, change my mind, and then sitting there with your feet up,
Just, and I just really feel for them because all they wanted was literally some respect, right? I would say that.
Yeah. And I mean, there were sort of foreshocks of this for a long time, with the Bundschuh movement, who I want to mention specifically because all of these dudes have cool flags. I mentioned Farding as as Moose flag. The Bundschuh guys, their flag was just a shoe, a peasant shoe. Just to be check it out. Bet you don't wear these, idiot.
But I bet you got on some of those pointy shoes. Can't walk through mud in those.
Yeah, exactly. And that was much less organized, much more sort of sporadic and had outbreaks here and there. Whereas this, it's still not a unified movement exactly. There's kind of bands of peasants.
Yeah.
Fully, these guys are just the lads from such and such a town. They're a Haufen. They're a band, right? So it's the dudes from this town have knocked in the gates of their local monastery. They've kicked all the monks out, and now their horrific peasant shoes are on the furniture.
There's so much knocking over some chapel, and stealing the paintings. There's rather a lot of that. That is a big thing that all the nobles are mad about. Is so one of the big things that they're mad about is that I don't know, the local nunnery will say, hey, the horrible peasants didn't give us our tithe that we're using to be quite fancy in here. And they'll go to the Lord, and the Lord will say, give the nuns their money, and they'll be like, no, and then they'll be forced to give them the money, so then they go sack a chapel, right? And then everyone's like, did you see who sacked the chapel? No.
Yeah, and the sort of the military history of this as a war is there's not very much there because it's a series of protracted cases of monasteries and chapels getting sacked. And then 2 or 3 battles because these are peasants who absolutely do not want to be brought to battle. And every time they get slaughtered.
Yeah, it's which I guess allows us to introduce the concept of the fucking Swabian League. These fucking guys. Is so. I don't know if you heard about this. These guys have horses.
It's a problem. They have horses. They have cannon, even sometimes,
which is just so creepy when you think about it, right?
The death tolls in some of these battles are just nuts. It'll be 1,000 peasants slaughtered, 10,000 peasants slaughtered, and 4 like 4 Landsknechts will die.
Yeah.
And that's it. This is like, the idea, that like there was a time when people were just like, they were just getting mowed down in their thousands or whatever. Like this is that. This is just like, guys showing up in like with like, pots and pans robot suits on.
Yeah.
And like going against like battle hardened operators of the time, like just fucking armed to the teeth with pikes and guns and shit.
It's also it's not really like prestigious. It's not something these guys want to be doing. Like there's the usual sort of unexpected nature of fighting peasants and the sort of like vengeance thereof, and we'll get to some of that later. But I do want to note that like the leader of the Swabian army here, the Druckses von Waldburg, he's nicknamed in later life. His name's Jörg. And he's nicknamed Bauernjörg, Peasants Jörg, because like this is like it's a way of teasing him, right? It's like he's the guy who fought all those peasants,
Which is just and this is the thing, right? So it's like it's not necessarily I guess that they consider the Swabian League and certainly the combat against peasants as something that has to happen, but still it isn't seen as like, oh, like a great job, like, oh, you were very brave out there or whatever. It's more like I don't know, it's more like what in a just world we would kind of be looking at in terms of certain conflicts going on right now, right? Where it's like, I don't know, the ragtag bunch of peasants killed like one knight, and they're like, well, we're going to slaughter 10,000 of you. And so like Homeboy lives in Ulm, which is like pretty wealthy. And like basically he just goes to all of the lords and he's like, look, I'm getting a gang together. We're all mad at the peasants. And they're like, yeah, okay, well, so
yeah. There is, I mean, this being the 1520s, there is a war on, inevitably, and inevitably in Italy. And so like all the guys who really want to be operators, all the guys who are really good at war are in Italy operating. So it's like, okay, well, who can you find to do this? Well, we got a bunch of like mercenary Landsknecht guys. We found some guys with massive cod pieces. And their qualifications, like killing.
And
love
also,
it.
crucially, not from round here.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you couldn't fucking raise an army for this. Like, it was completely impossible. Like, they'd be all like, hey, who's going to go out and kill their neighbor? And everyone's like, no.
Yeah, at best you have some, like, local count or whatever who is holed up in his castle, like, hiding in there and just, like, hoping that, the peasants don't break in. And you see, like various retainers do shit as areas get like freed from peasant control, but mostly it's just like, yeah, we just got in some outside contractors for
like this is real kind of like School of the Americas shit, like super kind of Blackwater, super like off the books, like go get me the worst piece of shit you can find.
The Dorgana Megamix. Yeah.
Look, I mean, it's not like Germany would ever do this again, where they would, I don't know, send in like crazed veterans of war to put down a rebellion. That's that it's not like they're ever going to do that again. Come on, let's just be honest here.
Right?
Yeah.
But the thing that really fucks them is the Battle of Pavia, because you beat the French in Italy. And all of a sudden, now you have a shit. The army is coming back home. Even though these Landsknechts were doing perfectly well slaughtering peasants, it doesn't matter anymore because you have an entire army that has just been fighting the largest power in Europe. You just sort of turn them around.
Exactly.
Right?
And so it's like, here come these guys, and in the first place, now they're kind of big for their britches. They're like, beat the French. Beat the French.
They did, and the thing is, like, originally, there was this sort of situation where the Swabian League had to use duplicity, right? There were a few times where they ran into like masses of peasants to the point where they had to either negotiate or like dissemble that they were negotiating in order to like get around them and then slaughter all of them. And this is not a thing after 1525. I also want to talk specifically about war crimes, right? Because so there's this castle called Weinsberg, excuse me, and the peasants capture this place, and their leader, who is a guy called Jakob Rohrbach, he goes, okay, instead of just taking all the paintings, what I'm going to do is, we've got the Count here, he's one of these guys who's just been hiding in his castles, we've got all of the, like, court, we're going to kill him. Specifically, we're going to make them run a gauntlet of pikes, which is kill the rich.
Incredibly metal. I love it, really.
It is metal. It's not nice. But the thing about this alienates pretty much everybody, like, on the peasant side. Because the nobles were already going to kill all of them, but amongst sort of like peasant leaders, and I include Gertz in this, he's is why he later claims I was trying to move them to a more respectable direction, is this is too far. You're not supposed to like actually butcher them. And it's a kind of weird anomaly in this way because like a lot of these peasant wars, what happens is you have, I mean, something else that you can talk about is a jacquerie, right? Like that's specific, like that's a French peasant rebellion where what happens is you capture a town, you slaughter all the nobles in the most horrific ways you can imagine, and then in recompense, inevitably, like 10 times the number of peasants are slaughtered, right? And the point of doing that, the reason for doing that is, the sort of seemingly endless historical like parade of abuses against peasants, right? So like you finally get your hands around your like liege lord's neck, you're gonna do some fairly horrible things to him and his entire family, and this is the point at which the German peasants do this, and it provides a sort of convenient justification to the Swabian League. Not that they needed them; they were slaughtering peasants before this. But to be like, no, specifically, these are like public enemies, and we're gonna like burn them all at the stake. Which is what happens to Jakob Rohrbach, by the way.
They really go for them. If you aren't killed in battle, they will round your ass up and they will kill you. And they are fucking killed in battle because these are literally some peasants with sticks. Right.
Yeah, there is like one guy amongst them who is like Gertz, who is the knight who knows about fighting. He has one arm, and he doesn't really want to be there. He's kind of grumpy about it, and is kind of like hedging his bets. And it's so uneven that there's kind of, it can only go this way. And I think a lot, specifically, just to take us wildly across space and time into 1940s China, I think a lot about the book Fanshen, right, which talks about the sort of like early communist like recruiting and sort of like consolidation efforts in this one Chinese village. And it's similar kind of contextual thing of peasants who have been peasants their entire lives, who have been peasants since forever, since infinity time. You have this like sort of bulwark of aristocracy, which is the most heinous, repulsive thing that you can imagine, that just like grinds your face into the dirt day after day after day, and it has been this way for thousands of years, will continue indefinitely. And then you're presented with this opportunity to do something different, and it's this kind of profoundly strange moment of liberation, and it's so much more heartbreaking when it lasts for like a day and then you get all of your limbs torn off.
Absolutely. Like it's so sad too, because it's like they do all these kind of cute things, these peasants, like where they're like, what did the Hussites do? we could make Gevalgenberg and all this stuff. And it's like, yeah, honey, but the Hussites also had cavalry. And the Hussites were doing this like 100 years ago. And everyone's kind of moved on since then. These motherfuckers have cannon. You know, like it's all these like things where you could see them trying, and they're like, okay, well, here's our best ways of doing these things, and it's just not gonna fucking do anything because they don't have enough horses, and it's dispiriting. It's dispiriting, right? Because like I love their little ways, and I'm just like, I'm so team peasant, and they were so right about everything, and also they weren't asking for much, and then they just get like absolutely fucking beaten.
Yeah, they don't have like a sort of unified, like cohesive command authority or anything. It's just like bands at Halfen of like guys who will be like, you know, there's 500 of us, we're calling ourselves, you know, the Bright Band or whatever, and then they get split off, slaughtered, or like the you know, individual city or monastery or whatever like makes peace with the Swabians because the Swabians rock up with their cavalry and with their field guns and go, okay, the boss is back. You have to put everything back the way it is, otherwise we will kill all of you. And inevitably, like, and you see this with like with the Jacquerie, you see this with all kinds of peasant revolts, where that system is threatened, where hierarchy has to reassert itself. Not only is it like brutal in the immediate sense of a bunch of people get slaughtered, but also it's worse. It's worse afterwards because it like having perceived that threat to it until it forgets about it at some point in the future. It's like its grip on power is that much tighter.
Like it's one of the things that really gets to me, okay, about this is, you know, you have obviously the massively unfair advantage. You have the fact that these guys just want to make things, you know, they just want things to be the same that their parents enjoyed, right? Stop me if you've heard this one. Like not asking for the world, like asking for things that within living memory were true. Like, could we just have it slightly easier? And they get just absolutely killed and demonized for it. And it's like, so in the first place, you know, they kind of know that they're gambling, but they were sort of, I think, banking in a certain way on Reformation stuff, where they're like, well, I don't know. I heard that we were all equal now. I heard that we were all thinking about religion. So, like, what's good, right? And then you have fucking Martin Luther coming out and just being like, I want to just say, fuck you guys, right? So, like, one of his quotes about this, right, of what he talks about the 12 articles. And he says, the peasants set up 12 articles, some of which are so just that they bring shame to you before God and the world, but almost all of them are in their favor and not drawn up to the best. But it is unbearable to tax and slave drive people like this forever.
Well, if you feel badly about it.
Well, look, you know, they made some, like, it is, okay, what you're doing is fucked up. But on the other hand, everything that they were saying is for them. So, like, it's like,
why can't you be fair and
like,
even-handed?
What are you talking? Like, what the fuck? Which one is it, Martin? Right? Like,
There is one other guy that I want to bring in while we're speaking of guys, because we mentioned them not having horses, and that's not strictly true. They had one cavalry formation because they were comprised of these bands, these Halfen, right? And one of these Halfen was the Schwarze Halfen, the Black Band, who were cavalry and who were led by this sort of low-ranking knight called Florian Geyer. And the reason why I want to mention Florian Geyer, aside from his name being Florian Geyer, is that he had like engraved on his sword blade, nulla crux, nulla corona, no cross, no crown. And to me, I don't think you can criticize anarchist praxis when it happens this way.
Unfortunately, that whips. And I simply stand some gay guy called Florian. That's how I choose to read this. And his sword. Like, this is challenge to all the sword lesbians out there. Why not treat yourself to an engraving?
Yeah, get yourself an engraving. It can be a good tattoo, actually.
Tattoo. I don't need more. Oh no! Oh no! Idea alert. Yeah, I'm afraid that goes hard. And this is the thing, is that like pretty much everyone on the peasant side goes hard, and is also kind of cool and right.
They show up and they're all of these like interesting characters who have like, you know, these sort of like fascinating aspects of their personality, and then on the other side it's fucking Jörg, the Castellan of fucking Würzburg or whatever, who is chiefly notable for like having slaughtered 70,000 peasants in a day or whatever, and then goes back to the rest of his life in mediocrity because the lifestyle that he was fighting to preserve was terrible and not really historically that interesting.
And it's like every single one of them are like, either you have some guy who has a really newly formed kind of theological identity and way of thinking, you've got some guy who managed to fucking whip a bunch of peasants together and, you know, is kind of just advocating for some idea of themselves as humans. And then it's just like, oh yeah, that's Jörg. He doesn't think that's cool. That's it.
Yeah. And it's had an interesting legacy as a war because, you know, we mentioned two of the good exports of Germany besides Rauchbier and hamburgers, Marx and Engels, wrote about this. And like, this is the reason why in your sort of like trad, like Marxist view of the revolution, it's going to be an urban proletariat rather than a peasantry that bring about the revolution, is because the conclusion that they draw from this is, oh, the peasants just get crushed. Which, hard to argue with in this case, certainly.
Like, if you go and, look up anything about this, dear listeners, like if you go have a good Wikipedia trial, when you get down like to it, it's just like the massacre, like you have like two things that are called battles, and then like everything else is the massacre. That'll be the massacre at Frankenhausen, and it's just like they are just killed in their thousands, right? They absolutely just go ham and kill as many peasants as they can get. I also just want to shout out my man Thomas Munzer one more time here, because when he gets caught at one of the massacres, he's like trying to sneak out the back. He's like, oopsie doodle, and he's like out the back. And he gets caught because he's got all his posts with him.
This would happen to me. This would 100%
and they're like,
happen to
you
me.
there, what's in their bag? And he's like, and it's like his sack full of his posts.
Yeah, this is functionally the same thing as like, what's your social media handle? I'm like, don't worry about that. Yeah.
Hey.
So it's and this is just how it goes, right? Like they kill all the peasants, like to the point where they're like, oh shit, who's gonna bring the crops in?
Yeah, that's the thing that I wanted to say, because like it's something like 100,000 out of the 300,000 peasants died, and like they didn't have to kill all of them like that, but they just fucking slaughtered them. They were gonna put this thing down no matter how badly they cut off their nose to spite their face, because like they couldn't. They killed so many peasants in the span of like 10 months that it like led to a labor shortage in the German lands for like 30 years.
Yeah.
Like, it's just like they just like, we don't fucking care. It's fine. We're not going to bring any crops in, but you guys are going to get fucking slaughtered.
It's crazy, because it's like this is one of the things that the peasants were banking on, is they were like, well, they can't kill us all because
it's like, no, that they can. Yeah. They fully can.
They're like, I don't know, I guess we'll just buy bread from Italy or something. It's just like, what the fuck are you talking about? You know, and it's, yeah, I mean, and it's like absolutely disgusting the way they're treated. And then, yeah, so
sort of capital taking off the mask to, you know, kill everything that you love. But like, also the thing is like, I think specifically the thing that interests me about this, same thing that interested Marx and Engels, right, is that it's this was a challenge to like what the future was going to be in 1525, and the sort of answer that we got is, the history that we're living in now, right? You can do the kind of like society if these guys had won meme, because it was sort of like, it was a blueprint for what the Reformation was going to look like, right? Was it going to be this kind of like radical praxis that means that maybe we just take all the paintings out of the church and we just sell them, or like burn them and put all the priests to the sword? Or is it going to be this kind of administrative thing that ends up being all of the same state interests, but they have a slightly different theology? And the answer is the second one. Sort of Luther's triumph here, which is very, very depressing to live in.
Basically, everyone falls in behind Luther. They write a bunch of stuff about how Thomas Münther's evil. They write about how stupid and bad all peasants are. And they can also do that because it's like, well, in the first place, they fucking killed everybody. Right. And in the second place, it's like, peasants can't read anyway. So like, it's all, if those peasants could read, they'd be very upset right now kind of deal. But, there's no one kind of left to argue with it. And they muddy the waters really effectively, too, because, it's difficult to get hold of the kind of radical Reformation texts for a long time. And, kind of thank God Münther did carry his posts around with him, because it's the only reason we know about half this shit. And they were like, basically, we're going to keep these as examples of what's bad. And it's like, well, actually, all this is pretty tight, actually. But they won. And that's how you get the fucking prosperity gospel now, right? Like it's a straight line to fucking Hillsong, right? It's just like, no, actually, rich people are good, and it means God loves you, and shut up. Right.
Yeah, so that's absolutely. It's a downer episode. I guess the only kind of way I can spin this positively is that it's sort of inspiring that there is no period in history at which like oppression has not bred violent resistance. And just because that resistance has been crushed, shamed, placed outside the bounds of like acceptable warfare or acceptable theology or acceptable discourse, even when it loses, it's still like in the historical record, it still leaves a mark, it still leaves a dent. I can't answer whether or not God likes it, but I do say that like historically it's important, right? It leaves a mark for prosperity, to be like, it makes it harder to do the trad thing of being like, feudalism is great because everyone had a massive smile on their face, and people accepted a kind of natural hierarchy, and were happier for it, because clearly not. They were willing to know that they were going to get slaughtered, and still try and resist it anyway. You can kind of view this as a kind of historical equivalent of a prison break, right? Like the thing still exists. The tendencies that made it happen are still kind of here, but people still try and get out of it, and people still try and like do better things and build better things.
I mean, I think that you're bang on, and it also kind of puts paid to the really feudal lords were all enlightened, and they adhere to rules, and it's like, no, they change their mind all the time. They are completely just testing the waters, to seeing what they can get out of people, and the rich are evil.
And their brutality is always legitimized, and it takes something like the distance of 500 years to it to be like, it was pretty fucked up that they killed like 10 times as many people.
I mean, it's like, it's worse sometimes. Sometimes it'll be like about 6 Landsknecht and like 3,000 peasants. It's like bonkers.
Oh yeah.
And it's like playing fucking House of the Dead or some shit. And it's just like, they just see them like zombies. They're like, yeah, fucking mow through them all. Like, go for it. It's just, I hate the rich, you guys. I don't know. Yeah, that's normal. Normal episode.
You got to.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, Yeah, November, thank you so much for coming on the show to talk with us about the German peasants and their war. I'm sure most people know, but yeah, where can everyone find you?
Well, thanks so much for having me. So I have three podcasts, as we mentioned at the beginning. I have Trashfuture, which is about tech and finance and how the world is shit now. Shit then, too, as we've
Funny
established. Well, there's your problem, which is about engineering disasters, and Kill James Bond, which is about killing James Bond. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, I am on there as Post Octoberist.
Oh, is that
I had
what
to
you
remember that
went-
because I just
Nice.
changed my at.
Okay.
Yeah.
I love that.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. It's like she's updating all of her contacts expeditiously, people. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Eleanor, where can everyone find your stuff right now?
Wrote a blog today. I translated so much Latin for you fucking people. So go check that out at going-medieval.com. As per usual, you can check me out on the socials at Going Medieval. The book is The Once and Future Sex. Buy it early and often. Yes.
Yeah, and you could find me. Luke is amazing on all the stuff. You can find my old show, People's History of the Old Republic, wherever you listen to shows like this. But yeah, thank you everyone so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.